My guest today is a reticent man, preferring to talk only when he's got a book in the can. When he speaks, though, he does with such felicity and candor, you wish he would speak for longer. Without a doubt, what this man spouts will give you pause to ponder. But before this cheesy attempt at verse makes him want to rant and curse, let me introduce an artist great. Say hello to Vikram Seth.
Well, hello, Anuradha. I don't know what to say after that. Maybe I should have a deep gulp of water.
Was it so bad?
No, actually, I in fact rhymed Seth with, what did I, well, for a start, my first novel in verse. The title is a rhyme, The Golden Gate by Vikram Seth. But no one other than an Indian would get it. The Western says The Golden Gate by Vikram Seth. You know.
Yeah.
And then another point where I talk about writing the book, I say, someone took me aside when they heard that I was writing a novel in verse and said, what's your next work? A novel. Great. We hope that you, dear Mr. Seth, in verse, I added. He turned yellow. How marvelously quaint, he said, and subsequently cut me dead. But it is interesting, the Seth rhyme. What did you rhyme with?
Great.
Oh, you did?
You can't have any
I thought you might have
objections to
rhymed
that.
with create or something, but okay, modestly I'll accept.
So, you know, I was only following your advice because the last time we met, you said it's a cardinal sin to turn the muse away. And when inspiration strikes you, not to say that, look, how can I do this? So when, you know, when I had to get ready for this conversation,
I see, that's
you
your-
were
that's
my
your
muse.
excuse.
Vikram, you were my muse today.
Well, flattered or flattened as the case may be, but no, I'm very glad that you wrote that. We expect great things of you.
So now that we've got the polite let down or set down, the polite set down out
set
of the
down,
way,
yes.
the polite set down out of the way.
Fine.
How have you been?
But as you know, I've been doing a lot of painting and sculpting and
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah.
that. At the moment, I'm working on my novel.
You've been dabbling, isn't it?
You can call it dabbling, but actually I wouldn't call it that, in the sense
You're
that
serious about the sculpting.
I would
and-
say
yeah,
so.
yeah.
I mean, you could say, for example, when I was an economist, well, you're writing poetry, you're writing a novel, that's great. Like my parents said at first, it's good to dabble, but then come back to what you really should be doing, get a good job, get a good pension, and then after a while you can dabble again. Well, they didn't realize that I wasn't dabbling. I was certainly testing my toes in the water in the sense, but I was serious about it. I was inspired by it. I was obsessed by it. And similarly, the last 15 years I've been obsessed by Chinese calligraphy. And then after that by painting, which added a touch of color to it. And then later by sculpting about 5 years ago, a little less than that, when I realized that I wanted to write a suitable girl, something I'd refused to do for 20 years,
I know.
despite the blandishments of, you know, various people. At that time, at the least convenient time, I suddenly got this urge to sculpt. When you get that kind of urge, you don't just dabble. You go at it with a kind of stupid obsessiveness.
Tell us about the fact that you're painting and you've painted in association, or this is a collaborative thing or commission piece by Absolute, isn't it? And you don't do too many commission bits of work, isn't it? You may have done one or two in the past, and this is perhaps the third or fourth.
I suppose.
Such
I mean,
project.
I suppose. I mean, I've done some commission work in what you could call music. In that I've written a libretto.
Orion and the Dolphin
was a commissioned work in a sense.
Yeah.
But in a sense, I had an idea that okay, I could do something. I'd written poetry before. I'd written a narrative before. I like music and so on.
Yeah.
So I was with some element of confidence. For example, the fact that something's going to be an opera and I'm commissioned to write the libretto for it. I do it if I feel I can do it, if I like the composer who's going to be setting it to music and so on. Similarly, the 4-year commission which eventually formed The Rivered Earth, which was performed in various festivals and broadcasts, that again was a commission work. I mean, the history of art, in whether it's painting or literature or music, is replete with commissions. What I did do in this case, because I had been practicing art for a long time, was to make sure that the inspiration was interesting, the shape, the iconic shape. First, it was interesting in its own right. It's very simple, it's not too complex like the Coke bottle, which itself is wonderful, but it's not something that I can do much with. Secondly, there's a whole tradition of people using the absolute bottle. From Warhol to Indian artists, to Kurt Vonnegut, to Hans Hollein, the architect. This has been used in so many different ways. It became a kind of intriguing challenge to see if I could not do something different, but infuse something of my own personality and background and enthusiasms into this. But I made it very clear to them right from the beginning that if I didn't find what came out to be interesting or something that made me, content or happy or whatever, then they'd have to accept that I wouldn't put it out at all, and that all deals were off, and that would be the end of it. And they were very nice about that. They said, look, quite frankly, we don't want to zabardasti force anyone into anything, and it's really a question of you. Now, for example, I was just talking about the shape of the bottle. In the Urdu case, what I use a lot of in the blue painting, in this one, you can see that what I use is the roundness of the shoulder of the bottle.
And this is actually, what does this say? Because
It
it's
says,
calligraphy, isn't it?
Naman. And it's a famous Urdu phrase. Everyone says, neither I remained nor the wine. I mean, it's a great tradition of Urdu poetry, from Ghalib to Sufi poetry, the enthusiasm, etc., etc. So, but the noon over here, and it's a noon without the nuqta, because it's not man, it's meh. So it curves around the edge of the bottle. Now, I was trained by my Arabic calligraphy teacher in a form of a script called thuluth, or as we call it, sulus. But this is more like a modified form of nastalik, which is more what we use in Persian, Urdu, and in what we could call the Eastern form of calligraphy. So that's using the roundness of the bottle. Now look at something like this, which uses the kind of neck of the bottle in a certain way, where the Chinese character for wine again encompasses the bottle, and the seal paste and the ink come in and out.
You'll have to read this.
Okay, this is jiu, which is the Chinese character for wine.
Right.
And then on the side you have to put a colophon with your name and so on. So this says Xie Bin Lang Shu Yu De Li. Now Xie is the surname Seth, Bin Lang is the closest they get to Vikram. Xie Bin Lang is my name, okay, in Chinese. Shu Yu means wrote this in. I could have said Hua Yu, which means painted it in, but I chose to write Shu Yu, wrote it in. Delhi, well, you can guess what Delhi is. It's Delhi. So Xie Bin Lang Shu Yu Delhi means Mr. Vikram Seth wrote it in Delhi. And then in the last one, the green, the Hindi one, I don't use the roundness, I use the verticality of the bottle. Here it's Pyasa Pyala, which is a phrase from Madhushala by the great Harvansh Rai Bachchan. And every letter is the same except Sir and La. Pyasa, Pyala. And there the verticals of the year, the Aki Matra, the Sir, the La, and again the Aki Matra go upward in 4 lines, and the middle line is the line between the bottles. So you get these 5 lines going up. Then continue and see what happens. Those 5 lines going up suggest music, because it's the musical stuff. And rather than putting a note in, or a note like C or D, I just put the rest, the symbol for the rest, her, which is like a Hindi akshar, her, Hindi letter her.
But it's a notation.
In notation,
also.
proper way, it's just a character for a rest of a quarter note. So much for that.
And you also say piyasa. What is
That's interesting. Pyasa is fine, but piyasa. Well, it can mean
like
two
the
things.
lover, is it?
It can either mean the lover, this fugitive figure standing sort of self-effacingly or hidden to the side of this solid couple. Now, whom she or he is the lover of, we don't know. And it can also mean having had too much and sleeping it off. Piyasa. So there's all that. But the point really is not this elaborate analysis. And here's the Pyasa Pyala, somewhere with something pouring into it. I don't know if you can even see it. It's kind of
well, if
hidden.
you look, you can.
If you look
so you really enjoyed this, haven't you?
I must say, I mean, what's the point of doing anything, whether in literature, art or music or any creative endeavor, unless you enjoy it? Otherwise, the thing is dead. It doesn't convey anything.
Like my little introduction to you, I really enjoyed it. No matter what you made of it, I loved it.
Frankly, I was taken aback by it, but then I got a bit into the spirit of it.
I hate to sound like I'm your publisher, but the question is, have you been writing? Because there's a deadline, Vikram.
So to get back to the painting, look, I can't avoid the question, but can we defer the question for a bit?
We can defer the
Okay.
question, absolutely.
So actually my publisher will be pleased by what I say now, which is this, that as a result of this painting, and as a result of the words of the painting and the mood and the theme and the ras, whether you call it Shingar ras because of the piasa hiding there, or the sort of melancholy nature of the colors, or the vibrant, whatever you call it, where the karuna ras, whatever it is. As a result of this, I wrote a couplet which involves the different elements, and the couplet goes, the emerald cup, the music high above, the dreaming earth, all thirst for hidden love. So that's the couplet that came out of it. And possibly the publisher will be pleased that I've finally come back to words again, and will know that I'm moving again away from daubs to words.
You know, I don't mean to pressurize you, obviously, but it's just that this announcement was made in 2009, and since then, every time I've heard you speak, you do want to defer the answer to that question. Is it because you feel that while you write and this process of writing is private and you don't need to talk about it right now, or are you just being a bit truant? Or is the muse being elusive?
In this case, I'd say all three. I obviously have been a bit truant in the sense that I suddenly got obsessed by sculpture and painting and so on and so forth. But it isn't just that. If the muse has been elusive, it's because another muse has come in, okay? And this muse has withdrawn slightly without making too much of a fuss. The muse of words has had most of my life and is allowing whatever this other muse is of painting to have her or his say for a while. But the third reason you gave, maybe by way of absolution you could call it, if not absolute, is this, that I don't like talking much about it while it's going on. And the suitable girl herself, is shy, and she doesn't like being brought into the glare of publicity before she herself has had time to grow into herself. So whether it's the muse or the girl herself or me, none of us really like talking about the novel much. After all, it hasn't been written yet.
Unlike when The Suitable Boy came out, or when The Golden Gate came out, where people had no expectation and there was just complete delight with what you gave us, or at least for some people.
Yes,
for me, let me speak for myself.
I was thinking it wasn't universal, but there it was.
This time round, it's going to be different. And how do you deal with that? Does that impinge on your consciousness at all? That you are now burdened by great expectations?
It doesn't weigh on me at all. What's the worst that can happen? I can fail. Or people might not like it. So, big deal. You try something, some things work, some things don't work. If, when I write A Suitable Girl, and the thing is completed and so on and ready to be put out into the world, the reception isn't good, well, I'll say, that's the way life is. It may be a good book and the reception may not be good. It may be a good book and the reception may be good. But it might also be a bad book and the reception might be good. So there's no real telling which way things go. The point is, as Conan Doyle once said, and he wasn't known for poetry, he was mainly known for Sherlock Holmes short stories and novellas, is this. He said, critics kind, never mind. Critics flatter, doesn't matter. Critics blame, all the same. Do your best, damn the rest. That's the attitude I take.
You were here in India, you spoke at the Kolkata, the festival there, the literary festival there. And in India, people in the media, writers, artists, they're all dealing with a sense that the freedom of expression is shrinking. That we are perhaps in an India that's less tolerant than it should be or could be or has been. What do you make of it?
What do I make of the fact that it's happening?
Do you agree that it's shrinking? Are you worried?
I think, take 3 or 4 obvious examples. I mean, the suppression of the paintings or the sought suppression of the paintings of one of our greatest painters. who then had to live in exile.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a disgrace.
Yeah.
There's no other word for it. The fact that not only was one of the most celebrated writers in the world not allowed to read, but even when other people read from his works, it was seen as some kind of outrage by some people, I would say, is again a disgrace. The fact that a cartoonist can't make fun of a political figure, it's a disgrace. I mean, we should be, and we shall be, believe me, we shall be. We're not such a stupid people as a few people make us out to be. We're not so immature as some current actions by some political and other actors make us out to be. We will be a sane and sensible society. We learned too much from the emergency about how the dangers of the suppression of free speech are. We will have to fight for it, of course, but I don't think that this is a sign of a maturity or the greatness of a society, that everyone who criticizes society needs somehow to be, tamped down.
Does it worry you?
It does worry me, but many other things worry me as well. I mean, certainly the free speech does, but I mean, I would not say this is the only great problem that India faces. On the other hand, the fact that India faces other great problems doesn't mean that we can sort of shrug aside the question of free speech. It's a complex society, many things go together, and we have to, make sure that while this pot is boiling, the other one doesn't bubble over.
Yeah. Every time I read about you these days, we hear about your house, this beautiful house which belonged to a poet that you admire very deeply.
Yeah.
A poet who wrote, I think, in the 1600s.
Yes, and mainly in the right, in the early 1600s.
Yeah.
That's right. Basically, his dates are 1593 to 1633.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful poet, George Herbert, and his life overlapped that of Shakespeare, and he was a religious poet, actually, an Anglican poet.
Yes.
And my background is very different, but I've always loved his poetry. Very straightforward, very simple, very intelligent without being too clever, and somehow there's a great sincerity to his writing.
And now in the Revered Earth, I think in the third, in the third piece, the third libretto that you wrote, in the second libretto that you wrote, you actually sort of worked with some of his poetry, isn't it?
That's right, I do. I use some of the forms that he uses,
yeah.
but I try to infuse them with my own content and spirit. But interestingly enough, one of the forms is a shaped poem.
Like an hourglass almost,
A
isn't
bit
it?
exactly like an hourglass. In fact, it's based on one of his poems called Easter Wings, where the shape of larks, which later seemed to be like the shape of a tree, was the shape that he worked with.
So is it destiny, you think? Do you believe in destiny? Do you believe in
I believe
fate
in
that
destiny.
you do?
Well, I don't really know. Have you seen Back to the Future? Okay, well, if you've seen Back to the Future, the young man's father says to the girl he's trying to woo, you are my density. So let me put it this way. I think it's both destiny and density. You have to compress your forms. You can't just let it be bikrawad and sort of scattershot and just unformed. And yet part of it is partly fate. You wander into a bookshop after trying to feed your Chinese village data into a computer machine because time is cheap then, and you think there's got to be more to life than data entry, and you happen to pick up a poem which will change your life. The translation of Yevgeny Onegin or Eugene Onegin by Pushkin.
And
I read it.
That inspired the Golden Gate.
Exactly. But had I said, no, really, I must continue with my dissertation, had I not seized this aspect of destiny or whatever you call it, then destiny would have come and destiny would have gone and my life would have continued as before. So there is an active struggle with what happens to happen and what you happen to take.
Are you a happy man these days? Because every time I read your interviews, you're always lying in bed and looking out of the window. Or you're lying in bed and saying that you're writing, and then you go off to Murano and blow glass, and then you do paintings, and then you have this wonderful huge advance for a book that everybody is dying to read. Are you a happy man?
Was it Dr. Johnson who said, ask yourself if you are happy and you cease to be so? I don't ask myself this question too often. I'm not even sure that remark is exactly correct, because it is possible to ask yourself if you're happy and say, well, to my surprise, I am. Because that does happen sometimes. Remember that life, is not all roses. I mean, obviously it's not. And there's no point at which you can tick all the boxes. Oh, I'm happy in work, I'm financially secure, India has not succumbed to communal hatred.
I found true love.
I found true love. I was coming to that, but I was putting it at the end. Perhaps is the most important thing, or perhaps not. And so you ask, is my health good? Are the people around me happy? Which of course is the question that Mrs. Rupa Mehra was asking herself. Well, I may be happy, but actually I'm not happy because they're not happy. So all these things. Life comes too quickly, goes too quickly for you to say, I'm not happy because not every box is ticked. You've got to say, things are substantially good, right? It's fine, we're having this conversation, but there are lots of other things happening around us. So we have to accept that we're very lucky.
What worries you the most about what's happening in India now? I know, we've spoken in the past, and you've always talked about how communal disharmony is something that worries you and bothers you personally very much. We've just talked, we're meeting about a couple of months where Muslims in Assam are still in refugee camps, and it's a very, very complex issue. Migration, all of that. What is it about India today, or the idea of India today, that bothers you the most and worries you the most as someone who cares deeply about this country?
I mean, many things do. I mean, it's
I'm
not
sure.
easy when people are committing
sure.
suicide for lack of this, for lack of, for going into deep debt and so on. That's got a bit better, certainly. But there are lots and lots and lots of other problems. But I suppose the one that I think threatens not only the personal lives, tragically, of many people, but also the idea of what we are as a nation, a tolerant and a generous spirited nation, is the one of communal harmony and communal tension. But I don't think that this is necessarily the right forum, because it would be too easy to give us a few sound bites on this issue for me to go into it. But Anuradha, I do agree that is something that does exercise me a great deal. And as time passes, things get both better and worse in that regard. But the worst culprits in this regard are the people who try to stir up people who would otherwise live in reasonable tolerance, if not harmony.
Yeah, because I don't know what word to use except perhaps dismay when you read about a film that's purportedly anti-Islam, which is released somewhere on the internet, and people die in far remote corners of the world protesting that, and it feels like such a waste of life. And what can you feel besides dismay?
I agree with I agree with that. It's again this balance between freedom of speech to throw any junk into the world, and constraint in speech, and not looking to see what things might result in, or actually hoping that you can create problems. But again, I mean, within religions also, there's a lot of intolerance. There's a lot of intolerance in Islam. There's a lot of intolerance in Hinduism. There's a lot of intolerance in Christianity. There's a lot of intolerance in almost every religion. So we can't assume that somehow, that everything is hunky-dory because, everyone's going to live in harmony together.
As a writer and artist, do you think, since you just brought that thought up, do you think freedom of expression should be absolute?
This is something which really, I'm not being evasive, but this is something that does not admit of an easy answer. And I do not think, I really don't think that I would even like to, to just
not be able to deal with the complexities of the question, isn't it?
Yeah, you can put it that way.
Okay, let's just completely change the subject. Have you been reading Shades of Grey? Have you read Shades of Grey?
No, I haven't.
Have you read Salman Rushdie's memoir?
Not yet, let me put it that way. But I've been so occupied with one thing or another. And as I say, I've been pretty much visually obsessed for a long time. And secondly, what my other space is the space where I'm thinking about, Lata at the age of 80.
Yes.
So it's not as if at this stage I'm consuming a lot of other people's.
You're a busy man.
Well, let me put it this way. There's not the room to juggle 10 balls in the air at the same time. And even 2 is hard enough.
So my final question to you is that I know you've made it very clear that you don't feel the need to talk right now about the sequel to A Suitable Boy or Ek Achha Sa Ladka, as they
Not
say
Ek
in
Achha Sa Ladka.
In Hindi?
Koi Achha Sa Ladka.
Koi Achha Sa Ladka.
After all, when you ask for a
Koi-
match for your
yeah.
grand, it's a wonderful title because
Yeah.
the Hindi publisher said, why can't you call it Ek Suyogya Var? Would anyone ask for a? You'd say koi achha sa ladka dhoond lo.
Yeah.
So the sequel to that, koi achhi si ladki perhaps. Yes, I'm thinking of her all the time.
So given
And I
that,
hope she's thinking of me.
I'm sure she is, would it be an opportunity to tell your story, to use this sequel to be inspired partly by memoir or as memoir?
Let me put it this way. It's not a thought that hasn't occurred to me.
Vikram Seth, I will not badger you anymore. I'll let you be, and I hope to meet you whenever you want to talk to us again. So all the very best.
Certainly
And-
before the next 7 years
and
pass.
look forward to that book.
Thank you. So do I.